Alright guys, welcome back. GM Light here, and finally, I know I'm a little late, but I'm talking about Insidious The Red Door. I actually wanted to go see it last Thursday, get early on that review and get on top of it before Friday morning, but I show up to the theater and, much to my surprise, the entire place is sold out. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe I would have had a negative experience with a teenage audience if I were to actually get into that theater. But still, I was very surprised. I actually thought that maybe this movie would even potentially flop. I made a video about that actually, something that I'm probably gonna have to retract now and make another video about. Yeah, and then I had a crazy weekend, had to leave for work for a couple days, so now I'm back, finally watched the movie, and now I can give you my thoughts. And right off the bat, I've seen a lot of the reactions to it. I haven't really watched any reviews because I don't want them to impact my opinion or anything, but I think that I'm a lot more positive on this movie than other people. I still have a lot of mixed thoughts. Not everything works for me, and I wouldn't say that the movie's great, but I am teetering on that mixed to positive range. If you don't know what Insidious The Red Door is about, it's about when Josh Lambert heads east to drop his son Dalton off at school. However, Dalton's college dream soon comes a living nightmare when the repressed demons of his past suddenly return to haunt them both. And that kind of goes in with my first positive. I did enjoy catching up with this family all these years later. Something that's been kind of frustrating, even though I really enjoyed 3 actually, is that ever since 1, when they kind of wrote themselves into a corner by killing Elise, after number 2, they kind of had to just go into prequel mode. They haven't really moved or progressed the story forward very much, and that's kind of kept the series in a little bit of a limbo, which I've been a little bit frustrated about, especially with The Last Key, with how generic it felt. It just felt like an assembly line version of an Insidious movie. I was glad that we had a change of pace, moved forwards a couple, 10 years, and went back to those original characters. And also too, I haven't seen Ty Simpkins in a lot of movies since he's been a kid, but I was worried about his acting not being good, especially too with the introduction of the character at the beginning of the movie. I thought that he would have that I hate you dad syndrome. I thought he could potentially be annoying or irritating, or that he wouldn't be fleshed out well. But they actually did a really good job with his character, and his storyline was actually the one that I was the most invested in with the whole movie. I was very engaged in all the parts where he's just slowly remembering everything. He's kind of describing what he went through, what he remembers about it, which is basically nothing. But then when he starts to go after and try and remember these things, you have these scenes where he makes these paintings, which I also think added a nice visual flair to the movie. He gets to really piece together his past and, rediscover how dangerous the further is. And all that stuff worked for me. I could see how, for some people, it's like spinning your wheels because we know everything and he doesn't. And, when you have this much of the movie taken up with rediscovering things that you already know, I understand how that could be, but I think that the way that they told the story was just so engaging that I really wasn't bothered by that aspect of the movie. You also have a situation, though, with Dalton and his father where there's clearly a disconnect, and it's because they never dealt with what happened to both of them. I think that made for a pretty compelling story between the two of them, and it also just adds to what I said earlier about how Dalton had the potential to be very insufferable, very much, I hate you dad, but they portray both of them in a very sympathetic and understandable way where you understand why there's distance between them, why they harbor all these mixed emotions with each other, again, it's because they never dealt with what happened to them. And I really think that this movie reframes how I view the ending of the second movie. And I wish that there was more screen time between Josh and Dalton, but with what we do get, I was very interested in it. I thought it was very compelling, and it just felt very real. You just feel so bad for them. You just really want them to desperately to reconnect with each other, and that's what makes it a satisfying story, because that is the point of the movie. It's the fact that repressing memories, repressing trauma, things like that, it's not a good thing. Forgetting, it's important to deal with those things, marinate in your emotions, and understand why these things happen, how they impact you, how they make you feel, instead of just avoiding them. Initially, my reaction to Insidious 2 ending was I thought it was a good, satisfying conclusion of these characters and getting them, to be able to move on and live a happy life. But realistically, something like that kind of turbulence and just forcing them to forget about it, it's not a good thing. It wouldn't be a good thing. And ultimately, it wouldn't work out. And, we see in this movie why it didn't work out and how that had a disparate impact on their family. So we finally get to see them face the music of forgetting and face the consequences of living a lie, basically. And also, too, all of these, characterizations, they feel like natural extensions of how the characters would be 10 years later, who they are, they would be. Especially with Dalton, it would make sense that he would become an artist with the way that he was when he was a kid, with all the drawings and everything. It feels like a very natural progression of his character. And like I mentioned earlier, I like the visual flair of the paintings. I think that all that stuff works really well. I like how that they use the paintings as a way of telling the story. It's a pretty emotional movie. I think that what works about it the best is the character characters, to be honest. But like I mentioned, there's also other things that I'm mixed negative about. Unfortunately, when it comes to the side with Josh, I think that his plot line, his subplot is a lot weaker than Dalton's. Patrick Wilson's still great in this role. He still gives a good performance, and I like his character. The only problem is I don't think his side quest and his journey is as engaging as Dalton. Especially too, for most of it, we don't really understand the point of it. We don't see how it connects with the overall story until later. And even then, when it is revealed, I don't think that it's an offensively bad reveal, but I also don't think that it's ultimately that engaging. I don't think it's that compelling, and it felt like stuff that could have been left on the cutting room floor. But my biggest disappointments, unfortunately, the red-faced demon or lack thereof. With the little bit that we do get of him, I still think he's great, and I love his design. They give a pretty cool texture to him in his face. They give him a more spiny, animalistic, and ashy kind of look. He looks more practical and creepy, but we really do not get much of him almost at all. His presence is very much felt. It's kind of similar to the way that it is in the first movie. Every time Dalton goes back into the further, you feel him creeping around every corner waiting to take his opportunity, and to some degree it works better for it because it's more implied, but we know what this character looks like. We've seen it before. I want more backstory on him. I want to see more of him. I'd honestly even be interested to see if him and Dalton sat down and had a conversation, what that would be like. They still characterize him well. You see through things like the way that his lair is set up, how this obsession with Dalton and possessing him has impacted him. Still see that artistry and kind of these weird character quirks that he has as a demon, and I like all that stuff. It's just not enough for me, and that was the biggest thing that I was the most excited about going into this movie, was being able to see this demon again. Every single sequel, it feels like they're setting up for him to come back. He's my favorite demon. I think he's the scariest of the franchise, but every time they tease him at the end of a sequel, he would never show up. They did it at the end of 2, they did it at the end of 3, they did it at the end of 4. We finally get him in 5, and he gets a little bit shortchanged. It's just he was the big selling point for me wanting to come back to this franchise. Although you don't really have to convince me to come back to this franchise. I'm always happy to see a new Insidious movie, but it's still just the biggest disappointment for me. And again, I wouldn't want anything way too excessive, I guess is the best way to put it, but it doesn't help that I feel like I saw every big money shot of him from the trailer, which is like 2 trailers. Watching that movie, I was kind of thinking that maybe I didn't see the whole movie, but after seeing it, I think otherwise. Kind of moving on to my other negatives, I just don't find the mode of the scares that scary. They never really get me. The design of the demons and the ghosts, they don't really frighten me. The best they could really do is get a shake out of me in my chair if I get jump scared, the loud noises and everything. But I feel like the first and the third movie are really the only movies to get the scares down pat. They were serviceable. They weren't the best. They weren't the worst. They were just a little bit forgettable and a little bit gimmicky. They play with some good suspense. It's just not enough for me. I also wish we got to actually see the family a little bit together more. We really only get them at the beginning and the end of the movie. It's just tough when these characters aren't together and we're trying to catch up with them and see how these dynamics and how the family evolve. But that was forgivable because I think that Dalton's solo journey was just worked so well that I was able to forgive that. Overall, I think The Red Door is a very solid sequel, a very solid finale to the saga of this family, and it wraps up the story in probably a more impactful way where it kind of delivers the message that you should fight your demons instead of just repressing them, trying to smother them, act like they never existed. And it shows the consequences of avoiding that. Like I mentioned, it kind of changed my feelings and reframed the way that I felt about Insidious Chapter 2. That ending to 2, now that we don't have that as the definitive ending, I guess it doesn't really matter, but it makes that ending feel like more of a mixed bag because people can't just forget an experience like that and move on about their lives in a normal, functional way because they need to deal with something like that and come to terms with what happened. Overall, though, those are my thoughts on Insidious The Red Door. I'm sure I've missed a few thoughts, a few things. I'm definitely going to want to talk more about things in, a ranking and talk about why I was wrong about it flopping, which I was very wrong about. This movie made twice its budget back in the first weekend. But until next time, let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Insidious The Red Door. I'm GM Light. Like, subscribe. I have all the other Insidious reviews. Put it right up there. Have a good one.